Hey there, it's me Eden. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to my channel and visit my Patreon page for early access, link in the description. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in a trench coat that flapped in the wind. As he stepped into the light, I felt a jolt of recognition. His face was older, lined with years of wear, but it was unmistakably me. Or rather, a version of me. "Alex," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "We don't have much time." I stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at the older version of myself. He, or I, looked like he had been through hell. Deep lines carved his face, his eyes held a weariness that words couldn't convey, and his posture was tense, like he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Don't just stand there gawking," he said sharply. His voice, though familiar, had an edge to it that mine lacked. "We need to talk. Now." "Who?" I started, but he cut me off. "You know who I am," he said impatiently. "I'm you. Or rather, the version of you that's still picking up the pieces from your little stunt with the time machine." My stomach churned. "You mean, the paradox?" He nodded grimly. "The timeline might look stable on the surface, but underneath? It's chaos. Fractures everywhere. You didn't fix anything, Alex. You just bought us time. Barely." "Wait," I said, my voice trembling. "If you're from the future, how are you even here?" "The paradox should've erased me," he interrupted. "Yeah, it should have. But it didn't. That's the thing about paradoxes. They don't erase, they rewrite. I'm what's left of the version of you that went through with the procedure. Alexis Laura Harrison. That's who I was, until I wasn't." Hearing that name sent a shiver down my spine. "So, you're me, but you're also her?" "Exactly," he said. "And let me tell you, living with both sets of memories? It's a nightmare. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because the fractures are growing, and if we don't do something, they're going to tear the whole timeline apart." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. "What do you mean, tear the timeline apart?" "I mean reality itself is unraveling," he said bluntly. "The timeline is trying to reconcile all the contradictions we've created. And it's failing. Events are being rewritten, people are experiencing memories of lives they didn't live, and soon, it's going to reach a tipping point. How do we stop it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed heavily. "That's the thing. We have to go back. Again. But this time, we have to fix it properly." "Fix it how?" "By ensuring you never attempt the procedure in the first place," he said. "But I already called it off." I protested. "You did," he agreed. "But the fractures are still there because the timeline remembers both versions of you, the one who went through with it and the one who didn't. We have to erase the possibility entirely. That means going back further. Before you ever heard about the procedure." I stared at him, my mind racing. The enormity of what he was suggesting was almost too much to comprehend. "And what happens to us if we succeed?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at me with an expression that was equal parts sadness and resolve. "If we succeed, I cease to exist," he said finally. "And you'll get a clean slate. No memories of any of this. Just a normal life." The thought of losing everything, my memories, my identity, terrified me. But the alternative was even worse. "When do we leave?" I asked. He allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Now." The journey back was nothing like my first trip through the time machine. The colors, the lights, the weightlessness, all of it felt more intense, more volatile, like the timeline itself was resisting our intrusion. When we landed, I stumbled, disoriented, and looked around. We were in my old apartment, months before I had ever heard about Dr. Thomas or his experimental procedure. "Here's how this works," future me said. "You have to sabotage your own life. Make sure you never get that flyer. Never even hear about the procedure." How am I supposed to do that? He smirked. By making a mess of everything. Trust me, you're good at that. I glared at him but didn't argue. Together, we set to work. We intercepted the flyer before it could reach my mailbox, hacked into my old email account to delete any correspondence about the procedure, and even staged an embarrassing public meltdown to make sure I'd never be considered for the trial. It was exhausting, humiliating work, but by the end of it, we were confident we'd done enough. As we prepared to return to our own time, or whatever would be left of it, future me looked at me one last time. "You did good, Alex. Maybe now, you'll finally have the life you deserve." And with that, he vanished, leaving me alone in the swirling vortex of the time machine. When I woke up, I was back in my living room. The paradox was gone, the timeline stable. But as I looked around, something felt different. The world was quieter, simpler. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. I wish I could say everything was fine after that. That my life, now untangled from the chaos of the paradox, slipped neatly into place. But the truth? Things weren't that simple. It started small, almost unnoticeable at first. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, like someone was watching me, but when I turned, no one was there. Little things kept going missing: keys, a coffee mug, a book I swore I had just been holding. At first, I chalked it up to nerves. After all, resetting your timeline isn't exactly something you just shrug off. But then there was the photo. I was rummaging through an old box of keepsakes one evening, looking for a birthday card from my mom, when I found it. A picture of me, or rather, a version of me, from a timeline that no longer existed. There I was, dressed as Alexis, smiling at someone just out of frame. My hair was longer, my makeup flawless, and I looked happy. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. How could this exist? I'd erased that version of my life, wiped it clean. And yet, here it was, tangible proof that Alexis had been real. I tried to ignore it, burying the photo back in the box, but it wouldn't leave my mind. That night, I dreamed of her, of me. I was back in that other life, reliving moments I had never truly lived, laughing with Harriet over coffee, arguing with Dr. Thomas about the risks of the procedure, standing in front of the mirror for the first time as Alexis, feeling both terrified and exhilarated. When I woke up, the dream clung to me like a second skin. It felt too real to dismiss, like a memory that didn't belong to me but still refused to let go. Days passed, and the dreams only grew more vivid. Each night, I'd slip into a world that wasn't mine, living as Alexis in a timeline that should have been erased. And each morning, I'd wake up more disoriented, more unsure of who I really was. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I dug the photo out of the box and stared at it, searching for answers in Alexis's smiling face. "Why are you still here?" I whispered, as if the photo could respond. "You can't erase what's meant to be," a voice said behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, to find Harriet standing in the doorway. Except, it wasn't the Harriet I knew. This Harriet was older, wearier, her eyes filled with a sadness I couldn't comprehend. "Harriet?" I said, my voice trembling. She stepped into the room, her movements slow and deliberate. "Not exactly," she said. "I'm from another thread of the timeline. One where Alexis existed." My legs felt like jelly. I sat down, clutching the photo tightly. How is that possible? I fixed it. I erased everything. Harriet shook her head. You can't just erase a life, Alex. Alexis existed. She lived, she loved, she struggled. And now, she's trying to find her way back. Back? I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. Harriet nodded. She's stuck, trapped between timelines. And every time you dream of her, every time you think of her, you're pulling her closer. I didn't know what to say. My mind was a whirlwind of fear, confusion, and a strange, aching sadness. What do I do? You have to make a choice, Harriet said. You can let her in, let her take her place in your life. Or you can let her go, for good this time. But you can't keep living like this, with one foot in each world. It'll tear you apart. Her words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. I looked down at the photo, at Alexis's smiling face, and felt a pang of longing so deep it took my breath away. I don't know if I can, I said finally. You can, Harriet said gently. But it has to be your choice. And with that, she was gone, as if she had never been there at all. I spent the next few days in a daze, grappling with the enormity of the decision before me. Let Alexis back in, and risk undoing everything I had fought to fix? Or let her go, and lose a piece of myself forever? In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. One night, I stood in front of the mirror, holding the photo in one hand and a pair of scissors in the other. My reflection stared back at me, a man caught between worlds. Slowly, deliberately, I cut the photo in half, separating Alexis from the smiling figure beside her. I'm sorry, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. But I can't do this. As I let the pieces fall to the floor, a strange calm washed over me. The dream stopped after that. The missing items returned. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt whole. Please subscribe my channel for the next part. And visit my Patreon page for early access.